have secretly wanted a world war to heighten their power?
Oh, yeah. 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 Hey guys. Alright, today we'll be watching How Did World War I Start by the Infographics show. Now, this is only a 12-minute video. This is going to be a really quick explanation of how World War I started. I really do like Infographics videos. They're usually really good and top-notch. He does his research. Been a while since I've watched a video from him though. I'm just going to assume that he's, gotten better. I mean even when I was watching his videos like daily, his content was always really good, so I'm just assuming, he's gotten better, right? That's what content creators do. They get better over time, or at least they should. Anyways, I'm going to stop rambling, and let's go ahead and, I guess, hear how World War I started.
It was called the War to End All Wars. Unfortunately, World War I didn't deliver on that promise. It was,
did not.
however, the first time in the history of planet Earth that nations from around the world fought in a single war. It started with an assassination and a series of questionable decisions. We can point fingers and...
Yeah, I would say questionable decisions. And, what's he saying about pointing
play
fingers?
the blame game. But really, there is no single person or...
Yeah, we all know it's Austria. We all know it's Austria. It's Austria's fault. It's Austria and Serbia's fault. Because Austria sent in that, I forget the word. Essentially, they sent in a letter that was like, yo, you better agree to this or we are declaring war. And obviously the demands that Austria demanded of Serbia were demands that the Serbians really could not accept. But I've heard some people argue that to avoid a war on the scale of World War I, it's questionable. It's not like the Austrians were going to go in and, genocide the entire Serbian culture. That I know of, at least. I don't think they were going to do that. But the demands were too much for the Serbian government. So the Serbian government said no, but also, part of the reason they said no is they knew they had Russia's backing. And Austria knew that Serbia had Russia's backing. So Austria went to their good buddy Germany, and there it just spirals out of control.
A country that holds all of the responsibility. Could the war that killed millions have been prevented? Most definitely. Let's take a look at...
No, tensions were boiling for decades before it blew off. Honestly, you can argue that it really kind of started in... Honestly, you can argue for any point of history, any event in history, you can date back super far back, right? But I think one of the bigger reasons is when Kaiser Wilhelm II took over Germany and then also fired Otto von Bismarck. He started an arms race with Britain, thus raising tensions between the German people and the British people, even though the German royal family and the British royal family were pretty closely related, right? Kaiser Wilhelm II, I believe, was cousins to the King of Britain during World War I. So, yeah. What would need to have happened for it to, for World War I to avoid? Well, for one, Kaiser Wilhelm II has to not be an idiot. Two, Serbia just doesn't shoot Archduke Franz Ferdinand because the murder of the Archduke prompts Austria to send in their demands, to which Serbia denies, to which then Russia's like, yo, Serbia, we got your back, right? There's just far too many variables for really to say that it was an avoidable war. Obviously, we like to say it would have been an avoidable war, and just mistakes happened. But the events prior to the, I guess, explosion of the powder keg are just too numerous to really change, in my opinion. Too many things would have to change.
At what caused the Great War, explore how it could have been prevented, and learn how to not repeat the mistakes of the past.
Too late. We're already repeating our mistakes.
World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918 and included countries in Europe, Russia, the United States, and countries in the Middle East. The two main sides of the war were the Central Powers, which
You forgot about Japan. Japan was in the war. They took some islands.
consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, who fought against the Allied powers of France, Britain, Russia,
Italy switched sides pretty early on in the war.
Portugal,
Let's
and
see if he
Japan. Later in the
mentioned
war, the United States would also join the side of the Allies. But
The Italians also switched the sides. The Italians fought the Austrians in the war.
what happened? Why did all of these nations get involved in one of the most disastrous wars in history? Let's explore the mechanisms and missteps that led to the First World War. Although there were many players in World War I, the conflict started with Serbia and Austria-Hungary. The Serbian government was eager to claim more territory for the nation. Serbia was already in a state of aggression due to
Yeah, I guess you can argue that because the Serbian government at that time definitely wanted to bring all Serbs under the government, right? They wanted their country to be, they wanted the land that, kind of like how Germany wanted the Sudetenland in a sense. Obviously, this is just comparing the desires of the countries, the unifying of people or whatever, right? Germany wanted Sudetenland because of the high population of Germans living there, much like how the Serbs wanted more land because of the high percentage of Serbs living in other territories, right? Obviously, the Serbian justification is probably more reasonable than Hitler's justifications, of course. Just the only comparison I can think of in my head.
the Balkan Wars that just ended a year before the start of World War I. After the Balkan War, Serbian nationalists wanted to liberate the South Slavs of Austria-Hungary, thus unifying the Slavic peoples under one nation.
By the way, are there any good videos on the Balkan Wars? I haven't found any, at least by any of the big historical history channels that make content like this.
The extreme nationalism led to the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At 11:15 a.m. on June 28, 1914, Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, were shot to death in Sarajevo, Bosnia by Gavrilo Princip. Princip was a Serbian extremist who had connections to a secret society called the Black Hand. The assassination was the match that ignited the First World War. However, there were many other factors that led to the powder keg that would explode.
Yes.
Should the assassination of Franz Ferdinand have led to an all-out war? Probably not. There's more to the story here. In the shadows...
Well, you're murdering a world leader, the heir to an empire, and honestly, that is going to lead to a war. Now, should it lead to a world war? No. Ideally, the situation at hand, the issue of the murder, would be between the two nations, right? The victim, in the sense, like the one that got, the nation that lost their leader, and then the country that committed the murder. It'd be like, I don't know, I don't know of any examples. I was trying to think of something, but I couldn't.
Lurked Kaiser Wilhelm II, who may as well be much to blame as Gavrilo Princip in starting World War I. Wilhelm
Hold up now. Hold up. You blaming Germany? I thought we agreed on the internet that Germany didn't really do much to start World War II. World War I. World War II they started. World War I. No. Not to blame as much as Austria.
II was the
Get
leader
outta
of
here.
Germany, and he was diabolical. Kaiser Wilhelm II wanted a strong Germany that dominated Europe both economically and militarily in strength. He did not want Russia or Great Britain to have more influence and power than he did. Therefore, Wilhelm II allied himself and Germany with Austria-Hungary. He knew that if Austria-Hungary went to war with Serbia, then Russia would come to Serbia's aid. This would drag Russia's ally France into the conflict. We'll examine later why Wilhelm wanted this war to happen so badly. Kaiser Wilhelm.
I mean, I can see the argument for as to why Kaiser would want the war, but I mean,
The second secretly funded Austria-Hungary in their endeavor to suppress Serbia. He allowed Germany to give Austria-Hungary a carte blanche or a blank check. Basically, Germany would fund the war effort using their wealthy economy to ensure Austria-Hungary came out on top. With the assassination of their heir and the backing of Germany, Austria-Hungary felt empowered to start their war with Serbia. They sent Serbia an ultimatum with such harsh terms that it was impossible to accept.
Ultimatum is the word I was thinking of earlier.
There was only one alternative: war. But there was more to the story. The decisions of Austria-Hungary and Germany were clearly geared toward war. It's undeniable that World War I started because of these aggressive decisions, but could the whole conflict have been avoided if other countries had made better decisions?
No.
Were there strings being pulled behind the scenes by the countries on both sides of the war? Let's find out. First, let's take a look at the Triple Entente nations, which consisted of a secret pact between Great Britain, France, and Russia.
These weren't secret pacts. They weren't. The only alliance that was kept secret was Germany's alliance with the Ottomans. The Ottomans was a pact made like days before the war really kicked off. The Triple Entente was not a secret pact, but Britain's membership in the Entente was less formal. They were more of the like, hey, don't attack a neutral country and we won't do anything, right? They were trying to kind of be more peacekeeper-ish. Like if Germany and France just fought one-on-one, Britain probably would not have joined, right? If Germany just fought Russia and France and did not invade Belgium, I don't think Britain would have gotten involved in the war.
Russia. Could any of these nations have secretly wanted a world war to heighten their power?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. France wanted land back from the Germans. And Russia wanted land from the Germans. Yeah.
Could there have been a secret plot by the Allies to set up a war they would eventually win? Russia is, and always has been, a large, powerful nation. What could Russia gain from a war against the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy? At first glance, Russia's role in World War I seems to be based around supporting their ally of Serbia. But as we look closer, it seems that Russia's alliance only played a superficial role in their decisions to go to war. In fact, Russia barely even tried to find a diplomatic solution to prevent the conflict.
True. Most of the nations didn't really try to find a diplomatic solution. I think the only nation that did try was Britain. And that was just Britain trying to be like, yo, this is bad for our profits. You'll disrupt the British trade.
Instead, they immediately started to deploy troops and ramp up military production once Austria-Hungary showed aggression towards Serbia. It would seem Russia had no intentions on working out the conflict diplomatically. History shows it was Russia, not Germany, that mobilized its military first.
Yes, but hold up. Why are the Russian troops? Why do they have like the kind of the Soviet Union red?
Russia
I'm fairly certain that's the Soviet Union like symbol for the troops.
Wanted the war to claim more territory and power for the nation. But there was another player on the Triple Entente side who may have played a behind-the-scenes role in starting World War I. France did not make any outwardly aggressive moves in the months that led to the outbreak of war, but they were making secret strategic moves. France may be the only reason that Russia prepared for war in the first place. During talks of what was to be done about the Central Powers, France offered Russia its own blank check. The stipulation was that Russia would help Europeanize the Austrian-Hungary Empire. France had an idea of what this part of the world should look like, and rather than entering directly into a conflict, they funded the Russian military to start a war that they could benefit from. France encouraged Russia's aggression toward Austria-Hungary and Germany. French leaders seemed to not like the idea of having a powerful nation of Germany right next door.
And also because of the events of the War of 1870, the Franco-Prussian Wars, in which Prussia unified Germany and France was very much against it. And France got their butts handed to them by Germany. So, you know, France has a pretty obvious motive.
If Germany was focusing on fighting Russia on the Eastern Front, it would provide France with the opportunity to either protect itself or launch an uncontested invasion into Germany from the Western Front. It would seem that things did not play out exactly as France predicted because of Germany's deployment of troops to fight on both the Russian and French fronts simultaneously. Now, if the shady actions of France leading up to the start of World War I surprised you, then what Great Britain did may shock you even more. Britain was a dominant force in colonization and had control of the seas with their powerful navy. Would they benefit from an all-out war in Europe? Germany was becoming powerful, both economically and militarily. Britain knew that this was a big threat to their empire. In the eyes of Great Britain's leaders, the world wasn't big enough for both a German empire and a British empire. If Germany continued on the path it was headed, Britain's global dominance of the seas and financial system would be threatened and perhaps lost. This was unacceptable to the leaders of Great Britain. These notions of loss of dominance may have driven Great Britain to stay out of diplomatic talks and instead encourage Russian aggression. It would seem that at the time, Great Britain had an inferiority complex when it came to Germany. They had failed to mediate during the Balkan Wars, and they refused to mediate during the lead-up to World War I. The thought process may have been that the more conflicts Germany was a part of, the more likely they were to be weakened. Great Britain had clearly won the naval arm race by 1910. It just seemed that it wasn't enough. They were still living in fear of Germany's threats, and it would appear rightfully so as history showed over the next several decades. It needs to be said that if Great Britain wanted to prevent war, they should have contributed to the mediation discussions. The fact that they actively avoided the mediation shows Britain might have had other motives, especially if war meant a weakened Germany. History is written by the victors. Therefore, history textbooks tend to attribute most of, if not all of, the blame for World War I to Austria-Hungary and Germany.
He's right there. Yeah. Definitely when you discuss... Now, I don't know what it's like in Europe. I can only speak from my experience through my experience of American classrooms. And how World War I is taught. Now, World War I is certainly taught in a better light than what it was for the generations before me, and possibly before you, depending on how old you are. If you're probably in the millennial generation, or because I'm at that awkward. Oh, just to explain, I'm at that awkward point where, like, not sure which you are, right? Because the years vary depending on who you ask. So I'm either a millennial or I'm Gen Z. It switches. It switches whichever website I go to online to find out what the years are, right? But the education that I received was fairly, we looked at pretty much every single nation's actions that led to World War I. We looked at Britain, we looked at France, we looked at Germany, Austria, Hungary, Serbia, and Russia. We looked at them all. We looked at primary sources and secondary sources. Mainly primary sources. We didn't really look at too many secondary sources, because we really just looked at primary sources and then discussed our thoughts, right? So I do believe for the younger generations, the understanding of really, I guess, who is responsible for World War I has gotten better, and it's no longer being blamed on one or two countries. It is now rightfully being blamed pretty much on every single country involved in the outbreak of World War I. However, it's shifted where it used to be primarily German blame. Now it's shifted to where it's primarily it's essentially split when you ask. At least the classes that I was a part of, that I TA'd for, where we would ask, hey, all right, go to this corner of the room or whatever for who you think is to blame for World War One. And the vast majority of students were then split between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. And then third place was usually always Russia. Germany would still get blamed more than Britain and France, though. But it was usually like maybe one person who would stand with two people would probably stand under Germany, and then like one person each for France and Britain, right? While then everyone else in the class would be split between Russia, Austria, and Serbia, right? But yeah, long tangent over. The teaching of World War I has gotten better.
You have to wonder who would be blamed if the outcome of the war was reversed. We discussed how the nations of the Triple Entente were by no means free of blame for the start of the conflict, but let's take a closer look at the motives and actions of the Triple Alliance, which was the secret
Italy
pact between
is part of the
Germany,
Entente.
Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Let's find out if they really are to blame, like so many textbooks say. Other than retaliation, what was Austria-Hungary after? In a word,
Land.
territory.
Yeah.
Austria-Hungary wanted to add more land and people to its already large empire. More land equals more resources and more men for their military. Austria-Hungary had its sights set on Serbia for a while. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand allowed them to perfect the opportunity to make their dreams of taking over Serbian lands a reality. Austria-Hungary's desires were made clear when they offered an obscene ultimatum to Serbia. The ultimatum itself was delivered on July 23, 1914. It required Serbia to accept an Austro-Hungarian inquiry into the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. The inquiry would be conducted solely by Austria-Hungarian investigators. Serbia also needed to suppress all anti-Austrian propaganda and eliminate any terrorist or extremist organizations within its borders. The leaders of Austria-Hungary demanded that an answer to the ultimatum be sent within 48 hours. However, the ambassador to Serbia delivered the ultimatum and immediately left the country to return back to Austria-Hungary. He already knew what was going to happen next. There was no way that Serbia would accept the ultimatum. This meant war. The ultimatum served one purpose. Austria-Hungary knew Serbia would never accept their terms, but they also knew if they attacked without warning, it would make Serbia look like the victim. By sending the ultimatum, it pushed the burden of avoiding war onto the Serbian government. This way, Austria-Hungary created the illusion of giving Serbia a chance to stop the war. When they didn't, Serbia would look like the bad guy.
I'm the bad guy.
But the ridiculous ultimatum did not stand up to the test of history, and Austria-Hungary is still seen as the aggressor. Really, what it came down to was that Austria-Hungary wanted to control more territory in the Balkan region. They needed a reason to go to war with Serbia to secure that land, and they found it in the assassination of their Archduke. Was the assassination a reason to conduct an all-out war? Probably not.
The heir to an empire, the heir to the future of the nation. That is justification for war. Wars have been fought for far less. Like that is a direct attack on the government. Now, obviously, it's different if, say, a president were attacked, because a president is elected by, most cases, by the people. And that kind of probably, if he gets assassinated by a foreign leader, that is probably more justifiable than a prince getting shot, right? But at this point in time, it was justifiable.
But it was.
And why is he like wearing a Soviet star? Like, that looks like a communist star that communist military generals wear.
Sufficient enough reason for the Austria-Hungary government at the time. However, none of this would have been possible without one key player. And I'm sure you can guess what's coming next.
Russia.
Germany. In the eyes of many historians, Germany is to blame for the First World War. Why
was
Germany considered the most responsible in a conflict they did not directly start? It's mostly because they alone.
What sources is he looking at? Is he looking at older sources? Most modern sources that I've seen state, say that everyone's to blame. It isn't solely one person. It's not Germany's not more responsible than others.
Had the power to stop the war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. All they needed to do was withdraw their blank check.
I've not seen someone blame Germany in a while.
Ability to support a war with Serbia. This would have kept Austria-Hungary in check, and they would have never issued their ultimatum. Germany also knew that if Austria-Hungary went to war with Serbia, Russia and France would both get pulled in. It was almost as if Germany needed to find a way to declare war on their competitors in the region without doing it themselves. Germany could never just outright declare war on the other nations, or they would risk unifying the entire continent of Europe against them. But by strategically destabilizing the Balkans, they could goad Russia and therefore France into a war with their ally, thus allowing Germany to start a war to suit their needs. The other reason that Germany wanted war was because it had peaked as a nation. If Germany allowed the rest of Europe to catch up, they would lose power and prestige. This upset no one more than Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was an angry militaristic autocrat. He believed that he was predestined by God to lead his country to greatness. He hated diplomats and maintained that the only way to ensure Germany's spot of power was through war. He knew it was now or never if Germany was going to become the predominant world power. When a power-hungry autocrat is in charge of one of the world's most wealthy and armed nations, there's only one outcome: war. In the end, World War I was caused by many different factors and countries. There's not just one person or nation to blame.
Then why'd you blame Germany?
Some are more responsible than others. If the leaders of Europe were less hungry for power and more willing to sit down and negotiate, the war could have been avoided. Make no mistake, World War I was not unavoidable, but the leaders in charge saw war as a desirable outcome, or were forced into it by their allies. A situation that would repeat itself again 21 years later. If you're interested in more World War...
Okay. I have disagreements with the information provided in this video. But I feel like I have stated my points well enough. So yeah, I don't think there's anything for me to add here at the end. Obviously, when you look at the sources for the causes of World War I, it then comes down to personal opinion as to the severity of the choices made by these world leaders and countries, which then play a part into how you rank them, right? Obviously, the German invasion of Belgium bringing in Britain does indeed escalate the war, and that could be seen as the cause of it truly becoming a world war just because of the global dominance of the British Empire, right? But obviously, German invasion of Belgium probably would not have occurred had Austria not sent the ultimatum. So, what Germany ends up doing kind of reactions to what Austria is doing, and that's how I look at it. You can have a different opinion. Please, let me know your opinion down in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thank you.